Welcome to Nevada Week. I'm Amber Renee Dixon. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and according to an April report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the COVID-19 pandemic worsened the mental health issues that adolescents had already been experiencing. Joining us to talk about what they're seeing right now and the children they work with is Janet Nordine, a licensed marriage and family therapist and a registered play therapist with the Center for Connection, and Sheldon Jacobs, a licensed marriage and family therapist as well as the vice president of the National Alliance on Mental Illness in Southern Nevada. Thank you both for joining us. Sheldon, I will start with you. What issues were you facing prior to the pandemic, and what has changed since the pandemic?
I would say prior to the pandemic, a lot of the kids that I was treating were struggling with depression was a big one. Milder forms of anxiety, but since the pandemic, anxiety has been through the roof. I've been receiving phone calls pretty much on a daily basis from parents indicating that their kids are struggling with excessive worrying and just a lot of anxiety, and I think that's directly related to the pandemic.
And I'll ask you, you have mentioned to me as well that you're getting a lot of calls from parents regarding anxiety issues among their children. What are they experiencing, these kids, in terms of anxiety, what's causing them anxiety, and is there a difference between what issues children are facing versus teens?
Yes, I am seeing a lot of anxiety because of the isolation children experienced during the pandemic. Still, even after a full year of school, acclimating back to being in an environment with other peers, bullying is a big deal, which is causing anxiety and depression. Also dealing with parental relationships. If our parents aren't getting along well, then the child is having more anxiety as well. And I've seen this amplified since the pandemic and since we've been reacclimating ourselves back into life.
I would imagine parental issues are something you're seeing as well. The pandemic increased stress among everyone.
Absolutely. I think with kids, they tend to replicate what they see at home. And so if parents are stressing out and they're dealing with other various issues, kids are going to take on that stress, that anxiety that's being manifested inside the home, and they're going to usually replicate it in other settings like school.
And that would perhaps be something from a parent maybe losing a job as a result of the pandemic. Have you been dealing with children who have lost loved ones from the pandemic?
I have several clients that have lost grandparents and extended family members to the coronavirus and other issues that happened during the pandemic, and it's been a lot of grief and loss work.
What do you say to these children that you're speaking with?
What I say to them is, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be feeling the feelings that you're feeling, or the struggle with the problems and the issues that you are experiencing, that you're not alone. And so really just trying to normalize it as much as possible, and really just commending them on wanting to get the help and to receive the support.
Would you suggest that be the approach that parents take with their own kids? Where should they start with this if they are unsure whether their child is experiencing mental health issues?
Yes. I ask parents to just ask the basic question, are you okay? How are things going? Not to have leading questions or not to ask black and white, yes and no questions, having an open-ended dialogue. Just that question, are you okay, tells the child that my parents are paying attention to me and they're really interested in what's happening in my life.
Have you noticed a difference between the issues that teens are facing versus children, and what should the approach for parents be based on the age of their child?
I would say yes. With the teenagers, I see a lot of issues connected to social media, issues connected to just the tablets and the video games, and some of the isolation that stems from that even. With the younger kids, I think the issues are a little bit different. I see more of the externalized behaviors with the younger kids, so acting out in school, maybe acting out at home, not telling the truth on a regular basis, things like that. Whereas the teenagers, a lot of times they tend to internalize, what's going on, so they tend to keep it within themselves. Not all teenagers, but a good number of the ones that I treat.
And children don't often have or sometimes do not have the vocabulary with which to express themselves adequately. That's why it's important for you as a registered play therapist, you are able to interpret what they're feeling through how they are playing. What are you seeing from children? How are they playing? I mean, out of curiosity, that will indicate what's going on.
I see, for example, in a dollhouse, a child may put all the furniture I have in the whole dollhouse, but only one person, and that usually represents themselves. That will tell me they're feeling alone or lonely, or maybe they've put all the furniture and all the animals because that's who they feel safest with. Or the parents are external somewhere else, not even in the home, but they're in the picture but not put in the dollhouse. I also do a lot of expressive arts where I'll ask a child, can you draw what you're feeling? Can you draw that anxiety? Make a picture of it. What does that look like? Because they don't have the vocabulary yet to express exactly the inner world that they're feeling, but they can put it out on paper, and it's amazing what they come up with.
You are trained in talking with children and teens and perhaps pulling those emotions out, but not all parents are. And so for a parent speaking with a teen who may just say, oh, I'm okay, what is your strategy for parents?
I said that the biggest one is not even talking, but just listening. I think for as parents, and sometimes it's a hard job, but a lot of times for parents, we tend to get reactive when our children are telling us something that maybe is a little bit uncomfortable. So I think that the biggest thing that a parent can do is to just listen to what they're saying, and just be supportive, letting your children know that you're there for them, and provide them that sort of that comfort and just that feeling of being safe. I think that's key, and I think that if you're able to establish that, I think that your teenagers will feel more comfortable and feel more willing to open up to you.
That takes work. Remind me again, Janet, what the question is that parents should be asking, and is that question applicable for both children and teens?
I really think it is. Are you okay? Like, how does that feel just to an adult when somebody asks you, how are you doing? What's really going on with you? That tells the child, my parents looking at me, they know what's going on. They see something in me that may be off. And then to follow up with, help me understand that a little bit better. Not to get your tool belt out immediately and try to fix it and give advice, but just to really listen, like Sheldon said. That's the most important thing.
What are the words you're listening for to determine whether it's a serious issue?
I would say, especially, and parents know their kids better than anybody. So any subtle changes in, whether it be vocabulary, behavior. So if they're saying things like, "I'm going to hurt myself," or "I don't want to live anymore," or if they're fixated on death or dying, that could be a sign that something more underlying is going on. Or just even words where they're maybe questioning themselves, or overly critical of themselves. Maybe negative self-talk is also a common one. So any subtle changes in language, behavior, I think is a sign that maybe something more underlying is happening, and that you may need to dig further as a parent.
The word suicide often scares a lot of parents. There's a thought that if I bring that up with my child, I might plant a seed in their brain that this is something they should be considering. What would you say to that?
I would say it's exactly the opposite. It's like a pressure cooker where you've released some of that steam, where the word has been brought up. It's not a taboo or secret anymore, and now we can really address it and look at it in a way that isn't scary, and we can talk about the big feelings we're having. If your kids are feeling suicidal, that doesn't necessarily mean they want to die. They need a way to express themselves and to get help.
When you do hear from a child or teen that they're considering self-harm or suicide, what is the first step you take? I would think, I gotta take immediate action. I mean, and then I think that's where parents end up in the emergency rooms with their children, which isn't helpful, or is it?
Well, I think action is a positive thing, but I think before you even go to that place, I would say listening, seeing what's going on first, being supportive, understanding. One thing that we do not want to do is we do not want to re-traumatize a child that's having a crisis or is struggling. So just being as supportive as possible, and hearing them out, listening, and then from there, after you assess the situation, and then if you need to take them to get seen, whether it be if they already have a therapist, or if it's going to an emergency room to get it assessed, so they can potentially go to a psychiatric hospital. That's usually kind of the under extreme circumstances.
Extreme circumstances. And the governor has announced some funding for crisis stabilization centers, up to 6, according to the Review Journal, that will act as psychiatric types of emergency rooms. But let's say you've established, yes, there's something going on with my child, I'm going to get them help. What's the likelihood of them getting an appointment anytime soon? How accessible is mental health care for children?
Unfortunately, it's not as accessible as we would like it to be. I know that I have a wait list. I know other therapists that work with children have a wait list. If I get a call from a parent that says, my child is suicidal, I'm going to try to really work with them to get them in a little sooner than the wait list.
Okay, what's the reality from your perspective?
It's the same, unfortunately. That's our reality right now. There's a lot of children and families that are in need. And I think that's been exacerbated because of the pandemic. And so I think that a lot of clinicians in the community have wait lists, unfortunately. But then there's some that do not as well. I think sometimes it's a matter of kind of just searching. It's kind of like, if you're going to a hairstylist or a barber, finding the right one sometimes, and it can be a process. And the unfortunate thing is sometimes, if your child is in a crisis, that can make things a little bit, challenging and frustrating.
And also, as part of that the governor's announcement, a new 988 hotline that will be established in July. What impact will that make instead of someone calling 911?
I think the impact is going to be huge because a lot of times when families call 911, usually they're met by a law enforcement officer, and all respect to our law enforcement officials, they do a great job with the training that they have, but they're not licensed clinicians, and so I think with this new number, you're going to have licensed professionals responding, which would think also be a deterrent from for kids going into the juvenile justice system.
Thank you so much both for your time on this important topic.
Thank you.